history of our own that's now not adapting to this. You ask yourself now, how can we adapt to this? Right? And in order to do this, I'm going to give you a semi-serious way of dealing with the disease of obesity. As of course, this is worrying everybody, that there's so much loss. So I have a very simple solution to this, which has tremendous benefits for everybody. So all you do is you declare to be obese is a crime. Okay? If you are fat, you get arrested. You are then sent to my jail. In my jail, you are put on a bicycle, and you exercise, and you put on a diet. And the bicycle powers a pump which pumps water, because this is a good way to pump water through many, many small pipes, because there'll be lots of criminals, as you can imagine, up to the top there, and then we let the water run out, and we generate electric power. All right, so we have converted biomass, okay? There's a lot of biomass walking around, especially in country. The fattest country in the world is America. The second fattest is Australia, and so on. And everybody will soon do this. And you can begin to calculate, you know, how much energy is just wasted in this. Right? Then when you are allowed to go out, you've gained a few years of life, you're much healthier, but since we don't trust people, you have to report, you only put on parole. You have to report to the police station every month to be weighed. If you put on weight, back you go. Now, I know this is a joke, but some people think it should be taken seriously. And that says, what is it that we're doing here? We are compelling people to actually live in a world they've since deserted. They don't do any exercise. They don't walk around. They don't spend energy on this. But they still are consuming vast numbers of calories. And that needs control. Right? Now, let's just ask ourselves, how does the body actually work? In your brain, you have a region in your brain called the hypothalamus. I'm just going to tell you something about this hypothalamus that's very interesting. I take a rat, and I put it in a cage, and I show it through a glass wall, I show it a cat, and the rat does nothing. But I open the cage and let the rat smell the cat, and it goes crazy. It tries to run away. It's just completely fear-driven, and it needs to get away. Right? And that's actually wired into the genes here of that rat. It's wired in that it has a connection between the olfactory, the organ of smell that goes back to the brain, and it's wired in its hypothalamus to these things, so that it results in hormones being produced and in this wild action of flight. Right? Now, of course, I can very quickly condition the rat, so now it can see the cat, and that'll make it also do this. It associates the smell. This is a very classic way of teaching a rat to do something. I take out the rat from this, and I destroy a tiny region of the brain called the postventricular nucleus. It's tiny. It's maybe 3,000 neurons there. And I'll put it back in the cage, and it now smells the cat, sees the cat, walks out in front of the cat, no response at all. What's interesting is now the cat is confused. The cat has to learn a new part of its environment. But the point is this: we have these things of fear, of all this, the emotional life is wired into us through our genes and our brains. And I will tell you another very interesting story exactly like this. In the southern states of America, there are two kinds of voles. Vole is a rodent. And one kind of vole is called it's one or the other. They're mountain and prairie voles. Now, one vole is very faithful to its mate. I think it's the mountain one. And shows the mate, and it shows what they call technically high affiliation. And the other one is just out looking for other lady voles all the time. They then found out that these voles are actually have a different kind of pattern in the parts in their hypothalamuses, right? And it deals with a hormone called vasopressin. They then found that the gene that makes vasopressin is different, has a different structure. They could take out the gene that made vasopressin and put it into a mouse. Just gave the mouse the extra gene. And immediately the mouse not only adopted a new structure in its hypothalamus for the distribution of this peptide, but actually showed a much higher affiliation. So a character like that is transferred by one gene. Okay? And that's a remarkable thing, that one can generate something that one would think is very complicated, but we have to code it very simply. And all we code it is into the control region of this gene, and what we think it says, keep on making vasopressin, make more, because that increases affiliation. So I think when we finally dissected all of this, we are going to find astonishing things about ourselves. And in a very funny way, Freud was right. You see, this bad part of ours, the frightened part, the one who's greedy, wants to eat all the time, Freud called it the id. The id is in your hypothalamus, no doubt about it. All of you have got this. But one interesting thing is you have a frontal cortex in front of this, which sends down stimuli inhibiting the hypothalamus. Right? And the technology exists to change the frontal cortex. It's called education. You can talk to people, and you can change them. And so I believe that we are going to find what the genome will teach us in the new world of biology will be a new kind of public health. A new kind of public health in which we come to understand ourselves more. And that we have to say to people, you have to take responsibility for your health, your own health, right? And we must educate the people to do this. So I think if we were to look forward, as I often say, I hope they let me come back in the year 2053, which is the 100th anniversary of the DNA structure. I don't know whether I'll come down or go up, doesn't matter, but I just want to come back for one day to see. And I think one of the dreams that we can have is that by understanding this intricate relationship between ourselves, our societies that we've generated, the way we evolved to understand our bodies in reference to this, by understanding this and being able to impart it, we can, I think, create a new kind of public health and a new kind of living for us. And by understanding that we can't just take the environment and do what we like. I think that that is what is going to be necessary in order that we can still continue to occupy this planet. So it's a long way from sequencing a genome to thinking about the fate of humanity, but that's the great thing that I think will also come in science, that we will be able to understand how all these genes that we have, how they work in order to build this very complex structure that is unique to man, which is this big brain. And I think that we have to come to terms with that. Well, I hope that this explains to you not so much the details of what we should do, but I think the details of how we should embed this new biology in what I call the new culture. And I think I once decided that what I would do is I would write a curriculum on what I call the human sciences. That is, to understand, we would call it anthropology, but that has very complicated things in academia. But the study of man and his works, and especially what has happened in the last 10,000 years. And I think if we imparted that integral knowledge together with science, the knowledge, the history of technology is like evolution for us, because it changed the environment, and now we have a genome that's not adapted to it. Then I think there may be some hope for humanity. And as a final word, let me say the following. I was once asked by an audience, is biological evolution over for humans? So no chance of us evolving. Let us say it's a tremendous disaster, and we are reduced from 7 billion to 70,000 people, or 700,000. Would selection begin again? And I thought about this, and I said, yes, it would. We would select for small people. Okay, small people, that is, I would be very successful here because I'm very small. And if I had an American audience, I would already condemn the first row to extinction. They would all go. The people who have not seen their feet for the last 20 years and don't know what they look like, all those people would be destined. Because, you see, you don't need so much energy if you're small. You don't need so much mass. You could have cars which were tiny if we were all very small people. But I think we would not get to that point, because I think we have to say biological evolution is over, and we must now take our future into our own hands. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cindy, for such a wonderful lecture. Si hay alguien que quiera hacer alguna pregunta, pues que la haga. Yo intentaré traducirla. Are you prepared to have some questions?
Yes, I'm prepared. I'm even more prepared for some answers.
Okay.
From you.
Nobody seems to be.
Oh, no question.
No questions.
No questions.
Okay.
Well, it's all done.
Oh, there's a person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, wait for.
You mentioned the problem of coming back from the moon, right? And so there is this big deal of information coming out now from whole genome sequencing. for instance, this International Consortium for Cancer Genomes, etc.
Yeah.
So I guess the problem we have now is how we get some information of some terabytes of genome expression, etc. So what's your impression on this? Do you think these efforts will help us?
You see, it is this great propensity of now that people can make descriptions of everything. See, it used to be that science used to not to be data-driven. This is the new thing. They all want to do data-driven, just describe everything. We can, with sufficient money and sufficient people, we can give a complete atomic description of you. Every atom in your body we can list and write down and say, that's you. But it wouldn't be you. See, it's not even, as if I can coin a phrase, it's not even knowledge, let alone understanding, you see. Because I think the best way to think about that is the following. The animals on this planet, that's raw data. And of course, many people go around in jungles looking for different insects and recording them. That's data. Okay? Linnaeus imposed an order on this, a classification. And that is knowledge. But it had to wait for Darwin to come so we understood how all of these forms could be related to each other. Had to wait for Darwin and genetics to understand that. So I don't believe, you see, that this will be the case. I mean, if you can't do it, the essence of science is the following. It is to be able to predict. It is to know enough so you can compute the rest, right? Whereas the attitude now is more is better. My answer is the least is best. The least you know that allows you to compute the rest. And in fact, it's only that will give you complete knowledge about anything. So I think this data-driven science, I call it the following. I think this is omic science, as we call it. I call it low input, high throughput, no output biology. So that's the thing, you see, because you would think that you have to think. It's become a substitute for thinking. And of course, as you know, everybody now relies on computers. In fact, the dream is we'll have terabytes. Of course, I have different names for these. To me, a petabyte is a Rottweiler, and a terabyte is a bull terrier, because both are pets that bite you. So, anyway, I think that this dream that somehow we'll have enough data and then there'll be a clever computer program that'll work it out for us is not possible, because computers are stupid. They are really stupid. And it is much better to combine human intelligence with artificial stupidity than to try to do it the other way around. And I think that that's the mistake now. And I'm completely convinced that, by the way, this will all go on and there'll be all of these things. But if you look at the history of science, even in the modern age where it's been organized, the big breakthroughs, the big transforming things, been created by very small groups of people. Sometimes, often one person creates the change. Okay? And I think this big corporate structures of science, you know, with a massive onslaught and the organization, can't create anything new, because all it can do is regress to the mean. And as we know, the mean is very mediocre.
Well, I have another question. I now worked for Science World, but well, in the recent past, I was working for the dark side, let's say, and I'm an economist, and you mentioned that the easiest part of the problem about when talking about research and science is getting money to make it move. Well, from my point of view, money is the hardest part because you always have people willing to work for nearly nothing. I mean, you've got the manpower to put science in motion, but not always the resources to make it possible. And I think it's our own fault as scientists because and most of the time, we seem to be unable or incapable of convincing people of how science or certain science can be useful for them. So we fail as salesmen. I mean, we are unable to sell science to the common public.
Yeah. Well, I think, that's the endless problem that you always say is, I used to say, if you build a new institute, the first department is the Department of Bank Robbery. But that's not a good recommendation because even the banks have no money these days. But I think, you see, this is the problem. And we might ask ourselves is how are we distributing, this? And is it sustainable that each investigator should have a lab of 10 people, who are going to be students? And are they going to be, you can quickly calculate, very quickly everybody will be sequencing DNA. There'll be nothing else to do because it's not sustainable. So we must have alternative things for scientists. That's why universities are terrific, because there's so many jobs in universities that, they can teach or they can sit on committees, they can form new committees and so on. There are functional jobs. So I think the idea is not going to be feasible. There are very few people that remain productive right to the end. So maybe you should change your job. You should do science when you're young and don't need much money, can rely on everything, and then you should become a banker or something like that. No, but I'm being serious because I don't think it's built on a structure that's like a medieval guild workshop, okay? Which is novices learning from skilled craftsmen. Now, of course, it's become very corporate in its structure. And I think that's not sustainable. It'll have to be different. But I don't know how to change this. I can only give you one thing. I was once asked to give a talk to an organization that dealt with, biotechnology, medical research, and so on. And they wanted a title, so I gave them a talk, the title. The title is called The Casino Fund. And the Casino Fund is the following. It says everybody who gives money for science gives 1% to the Casino Fund and writes it off, forgets about it. Right? That means, who do you give the Casino Fund to? You give it to gamblers who have been successful. You give it to me. Let me choose the projects. Let me choose the people. All right? Well, what was the outcry from the audience? All the business people said, how can we ensure payback on the 1%? They've got to have that, must pay. So I said, okay, make it 0.1%. It doesn't matter. That they need it. And of course, all the academics said, no, we must have peer review. So as you know, peer review doesn't take any risks. It is said that every grant application can be structured as follows. One half of it has already been done, and the other half will never be done. So I think it's just the thing. And I also noticed one other thing, and that is the following. As the total money for science shrinks relatively, the total number of people allocating that money rises. And there are many committees, many panels, working groups, all doing, and of course everybody wants a measure, a metric that they need to apply. And that's all the people want. And I think that it's good because it's quite a good equation, because when there's no money left for science, then all the scientists can just allocate no money. They can divide it up amongst themselves so they can be busy. It would be, of course, imaginary money, and we have to go on to the complex plane then. But basically, I think that is a job. I don't know what the solution is. I think everything can be scaled back. You don't need a group of 16 or 40 or 38 to do this job. It's based, the Americans introduced a new form of slavery. It's called graduate students. It's true. And a new form of indentured laborer called the postdoc. Okay? And that's how they do the work. Whereas it would be much better to have a smaller group of professional research officers, people who knew how to do things, people who were skilled men of the craft, rather than employ students to do all these jobs for which they're totally unsuited for. They should be learning how to be scientists, not how to obey the master and produce this. But I'm afraid those are cultural changes that'll take a long time to change. But we need to think about this. And maybe you should ask yourself, maybe we test everybody by putting them in a room with a few pieces of wire, pencil and paper, and see if they can make science out of what's in the room. Not that they need this machine and that machine and so on. So I don't know what the answer is, and you know, I'm not in that game anymore. Yes, by the way, that's why the human genome, to study it, is very easy. You don't require any money. All the data's there, it's free, it's been done. Okay? You just have to use this piece of technology. It's in your head. And you don't need to be supported by anybody. The only time you need support is when you try to read a journal. Then they demand $32 from you. But that's another crime.
I don't see any more questions. Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much.